Hello everyone, welcome back to a new video. In today's video, I wanted to do a book review for Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I've never actually filmed a dedicated book review before for just one book, so I am a little bit nervous about this, and I don't know how long the video will be. I'm not sure how I will structure it, how I will organize my thoughts, but I felt that in my wrap-up, I would probably spend too much time just talking about this book, and I decided to just film a separate video about it, so that way I have more time, I guess, to discuss my thoughts about the book. So Shirley is the third book by Charlotte Bronte that I have read. I did read Jane Eyre a couple years ago, and I believe I gave that one 3.5 stars when I read it. And I do think if I were to reread it, I would enjoy it a lot more. But at the time, I had really high expectations, and they weren't all met, so it was kind of a disappointment, but I do want to reread it very, very soon. And I also read Villette by Charlotte Bronte a couple years ago and very much enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it just a little more than Jane Eyre. And then this book, I am really, really surprised to say that I prefer it over both Villette and Jane Eyre. Having said that, I feel like if I were to reread the two, there may be some change in my ratings. I'm not too sure if this would still be my favorite if I were to reread her other 2 books that I have read, so we'll see. I still have to read The Professor by her, but it's just really interesting that this one is currently at the top. But anyways, so getting into the book, I was not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I went in with very low expectations. I had heard it's very slow paced, not the most exciting book, and not really all that romantic compared to Villette and Jane Eyre. And so I just really tempered my expectations. And interestingly enough, the very first chapter of the book gives us a little bit of a glimpse into what to expect from the story. And it's Charlotte telling the reader directly what to expect from the book. And I'll just read the paragraph here. It says, "If you think from this prelude that anything like a romance is preparing for you, reader, you never were more mistaken. Do you anticipate sentiment and poetry and reverie? Do you expect passion and stimulus and melodrama? Calm your expectations. Reduce them to a lowly standard. Something real, cool, and solid lies before you. Something unromantic as Monday morning, when all who have work wake with the consciousness that they must rise and betake themselves thereto. It is not positively affirmed that you shall not have a taste of the exciting, perhaps towards the middle and close of the meal, but it is resolved that the first dish set upon the table shall be one that a Catholic, aye, even an Anglo-Catholic, might eat on Good Friday and Passion Week. It shall be cold lentils and vinegar without oil. It shall be unleavened bread with bitter herbs and no roast lamb." So I read that paragraph, and again, I tempered my expectations, and I'm very glad that I did because I was pleasantly surprised with where the story went. The book begins in 1811 Yorkshire, and we have the backdrop of the Napoleonic Wars as well as the Industrial Revolution, which has caused a lot of change, especially when it comes to different industries like mills. And in this book, we have Robert Moore, who is a mill owner, and he has had to lay off many of his employees as he is supposed to be receiving all this new machinery as a result of the Industrial Revolution, all the changes that have been happening in England. And this leads to a lot of unrest, a lot of unhappy ex-employees. His business is heavily affected by these unhappy people that are now out of a job. And Robert, he's a very complex character. He is not a cold-hearted, uncaring person, but he's trying to keep his own business afloat and prevent his own financial ruin. The first, I'd say, third to half of the book really deals with all these changes that are occurring in the Industrial Revolution, and then it kind of simmers down in the second half. We don't have as much of that, I guess, popping up. It's more character focused in the second half, and we have some wonderful characters that are introduced. I already mentioned Robert Moore. He's a very fascinating character, and he's very much focused on having his business thrive. And as a result, he basically pushes people away. He doesn't really show the depth of his feelings. And he even said that he can't afford to marry for love and things like that. He's very much focused on just making sure that his business thrives. And we're also introduced to Caroline Helstone, and she is one of the most wonderful characters I've ever read. A very quiet and humble girl with such inner strength. She's very relatable in that she's an introvert, but has a lot of very, very deep thoughts that she I guess, struggles to share with those around her. But there were so many moments throughout the story where she's very introspective, and we have paragraphs upon paragraphs of her thoughts, her very deep thoughts about life and faith and love, toil, what it means to be a single woman in England at the time. Caroline struggled a lot with loneliness. She grew up without her parents, not knowing who they are, and without very many friends, and she just feels like her life is not amounting to anything. So she decides that becoming a governess would be a great idea. She receives a lot of pushback from her guardian and realizes that there are people around her deserving of her time, deserving of friendship. She formed some beautiful bonds with some wonderful characters, and her character development was just wonderful. I love, love, love Caroline. Caroline also has to experience some unrequited love, and I do agree with Charlotte in that paragraph that I read where she basically tells you not to expect a romance. And even though this novel I would not say is a romance, I do think the romantic elements are very romantic and very unexpectedly so. And I just loved those elements so much. And I don't want to say anything because it will spoil a lot of the plot, but even though I would not call this a romance, the romance in it was just wonderful. But going back to Caroline and her character and her personality, even though she's shy and quiet and very, very much an introvert, she will speak her mind when she feels it's necessary and is not afraid to do so. It just depends on the situation. And there's one scene where she basically tells Robert off and tells him that the way that he's trying to attain fulfillment and happiness is wrong, and he's missing out on a lot that life has to offer because of his perspective on work and all of that. She's just such a wonderful character. I love her so much. And I also really, really loved Robert as a character as well. In some ways, he reminded me of Mr. Thornton from North and South. They definitely have many differences, but there was just something of that Mr. Thornton in Robert. And in the industrial aspect of the books and the fact that it's set in the north of England, there are definitely some similarities. Although the writing is very different, the tone is very different. I feel if you do like North and South, you would probably enjoy this novel. Caroline and Robert are definitely the stars of the book for me, but another wonderful character who the book is named for is Shirley, of course. She isn't introduced until quite far into the book. I think it's after the 30% mark that we are introduced to her, and she is such an opposite of Caroline. She's feisty and fiercely independent and is even referred to as gentlemanlike many times throughout the book. She's a very intelligent businesswoman. She's an heiress, very, very smart, speaks her mind. She and Caroline develop such a beautiful friendship. It's one of the most beautiful female friendships I've ever read. I so enjoyed seeing them get to know each other, and even with their very different personalities and even opposing views on many things, they just formed such a strong bond. And I believe Charlotte Bronte wrote Caroline and Shirley's personalities to be similar to her sisters, who I think passed away before this book was written. But Shirley is meant to represent Emily, and Caroline is meant to represent Anne, from what I've heard. Anne was a lot more withdrawn and shy, and Emily was very, very feisty. I think the reason I loved this book so much is just the wonderful cast of characters. Of course, the three main characters were amazing, but also the side characters really brought something special to the table. Oftentimes with side characters, I tend to not care as much. Just thinking of authors like Dickens, sometimes the side characters are wonderful and I love them. But other times there are just so many of them introduced that by the time we find out why they were important to the story, I just don't really care anymore. In this book, the side characters were all very, very important. Some of them I didn't even realize how important they would be until later on in the story, and it was a moment of, wow, that's why this character was introduced. And I just think the character work in this book is genius and just wonderful. Later on in the story, we're also introduced to Robert Moore's brother, Louis, who is fascinating, a very interesting character. I'm not all that sure that I really like him, but I just thought he was fascinating and very complex as well. And he really alters some of the plot line in a way that I did not expect. That's just the beauty of this book, is the complexity with each character and the ability of Charlotte Bronte to make me both annoyed with a character but also feel for them. Just as an example, Robert, where he is laying off these men. They are dirt poor, they're struggling to make ends meet, and I'm frustrated with him. I wish he showed more empathy and just showed that he cares about these people, but at the same time we're made to feel sympathy for him as well. His choices lead to some violence and riots and moments with a lot of tension, and he really does have to face the consequences of his actions, but also the consequences of something he can't control. He can't control the changes that are happening with the different industries in England. It's out of his control, and I just feel like she portrays Robert as slightly more morally gray. I honestly don't know what else to say about the book. I'm not the most analytical of readers, but from what I was able to, I guess, absorb from the story, it really, really affected me emotionally. I so connected to Caroline and Shirley as well. I loved Robert, and I especially loved the writing. Charlotte Bronte's writing is wonderful. And I do think another reason I liked this one a little bit more than the other two that I've read by her is this one is in third person, which I prefer over first person. Not too sure why that is, honestly, but I found over the years I definitely prefer third person omniscient. I think Charlotte Bronte is also wonderful at writing about serious and important themes, but with a lot of humorous moments as well. There were many moments I found myself smiling, laughing out loud. This is a slow-paced book. I understand why it's not people's favorite, why it makes people feel a little bogged down while they're reading it, but I do think that having realistic expectations when going into this book will make the reading process a lot better. Just expecting to take your time, getting to know these characters, getting into their minds, and just enjoying the writing as you're reading it. It's just wonderful. I think I mentioned I gave this book 4.5 stars. It was almost 5 stars, almost that, you know, this is perfect, I wouldn't have changed anything. Wasn't quite there, but very, very close. Either way, I so enjoyed my time reading this book, and I'm very excited to reread it in the future. And I would highly recommend it if it does sound interesting to you. Just obviously having the right expectations going in will definitely help with the reading experience, and not expecting it to be like Jane Eyre or to be like the other Bronte novels out there. But I would highly recommend. But those are my thoughts on Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts. They weren't as in-depth as maybe other people's thoughts are, but I really enjoyed my time with it, and I just wanted to chat a little bit about the book. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!